say that to be specific, 2020 and 2021 were the years where, if you had an idea in the deck and it seemed like the dream and the concept is reasonable, then the valuations are quite high, and also the checks being written are quite fast. 2022 and 2023 were, we have been hit quite significantly by great funding winter, but at the same time, it has made our founders more disciplined. Their unit economics are more in check, really because they just knew that if they don't survive, then basically there's not enough funding to go around that's really easy to raise from. But that also means that a lot of the startups, I think, on the flip side, because there's the buzzword of I'm a startup founder is no longer, let's say, it's a happy go lucky because you get funded easily. The people who are in this space are also more reasonable, but also more dedicated and really, their intention to grow their business and find the product market fit, the right profitability is there. So I think there are two perspectives that we look at there.
Thanks. Because certainly it goes over the adage that pressure is indeed a privilege, and there's no time to dither about as when the age of easy money is there. Now, when you look at the startups that you work with, especially Alex, I've seen last conference where there was this entire boost in terms of number of ideas coming in, going to execution, solutions, all you have help with that. But from the startup stage, from the founders and the way you were actually incubating and nurturing them, what do you see as best practices the way they can all learn from in terms of sharpening or smoothing that learning curve, sharpening value proposition, creating healthy moats around their value proposition so they can really secure that funding which is not readily available? Let me start here with Ray.
For you to be able to really identify what your value proposition is, right? How to get to, let's say, a profitable path. One of the things that we want to inculcate, or at least are very strong with our founders, is really getting in touch with their customers and getting that feedback really fast. I think more than anything, it has been a thing that is done before, and that thing still remains the same. You have to be in touch with your customers because if you have a vision of what your product could be, every founder has an idea of, this is how the path towards my future would look like. If you're not flexible and also just agile in adapting your product and let's say, your value proposition, then your product is easy to go to disappear. And we've seen that in a lot of, let's say, but then I see a lot of products where they tried and they stuck with, let's say, their what they thought the product should be, but without listening and actually adapting, then it's not necessary.
Yeah, absolutely. And this feedback will really happen once you propel them into getting tough but necessary feedback from market and customers, right? And I guess that's one of the skill sets you're seeing now, where you're trying to inculcate founders, is to be open to that feedback, however harsh it might be, because it might spell the difference between success, in rounds, in terms of investment rounds, or just failure and crash, and nobody knows what happened, right? So then what do you see also in terms of how these markers for discipline are being inculcated in your startups?
Yeah, no, I think I probably just aggressively agree with Renee, and I'll just paint it a slightly different way. When we're dealing with startups that are in kind of the first 6 to 12 months of revenue traction, we really try to guide them to focus on three particular things. So the first one is the tech. It's relatively easy to pull something together that you can test and then sell to clients. But as that starts to scale, the way that you've architected, the underlying framework and the languages and the programs that you've built on starts to become super important as you're catering to a large number of users and you're adding new features. So making sure that the tech is scalable is the first thing. The second thing is just revenue growth. So just focusing, whether you're a B2B startup, focusing on sales and the right kind of digital content, or whether you're a B2C startup, focusing very strongly probably through social media channels, is just targeting customers, and that's where Rennie's point comes in, right? Which is not just to get the word out, but also to listen and get the feedback from customers and evolve or pivot your product as you have to. And then the third thing that we help them with is fundraising, because as you are building that early traction and you're showing month-on-month growth and retained user base, that's where the early stage VCs like Ideaspace and some of the other VCs that cut smaller checks will be interested to try and get in early, but they want to see that traction. So tech, scalable, revenue growth and first kind of proper fundraising round, right? You don't need culture obviously is important. The ability to hire great people is important, but it will probably be more critical a little bit later, right? So as a founding team, focus on the things that are important in that relatively early, kind of 6 to 12 month stage, and then when you've got past that and you're starting to see more natural growth, then you can start thinking about the more sophisticated things like culture and hiring and progression and all that sort of stuff. But focus on the most critical things that are right in front of you in order to establish that product market fit.
In a way, this is basically a clarion call for back to basics, right? And let's put all the bells and whistles after we get over this, this tough environment, and just focus on what the customer really wants.
Absolutely. So just one final point on that, a startup is still a business, right? It's a startup, and it follows a slightly different trajectory to profitability and sustainable operations, but it is still fundamentally a business. So, sharp horror, you need to think about customers and revenue and how you're going to fund the business, which might be venture capital as opposed to debt, but you're still looking at fundamentals of business management, business growth.
Thanks, Kevin. Before I comes in, I think the parameter now is shorter runways and horizons to make it work. And that's what we're seeing with a lot of funders' expectations. We'll talk about it in the next question. How are you seeing for the tools you're giving, enabling startups? What are you seeing the feedback on in terms of how to get there?
So actually what I wanted to do is to really kind of get that lens of very, very early, and then put that lens on, because let's not forget the startups that have found product market fit still do need to fundraise and still need to get better, right? And shock and horror, it's kind of the same, right? I mean, after product market fit, you really, all the more so, have that mindset that customer is king, and getting out of the building, as they say, is ever so important, right? And then second to that, and kind of double down, Dexter just left, but something that he said earlier is, regardless of how big you are, you really need to keep that, the gene of experimentation intact, to the point of maybe then disrupting yourself, right? And I think it's so easy to have that experimentation kind of culture in the beginning and then lose that as you scale. But I think that it's very crucial to keep that as part of your DNA, regardless of stage. And I think the very last one is really keeping an eye on your unit economics and understanding which of these, because it can get so tricky, right? There are so many of them, all of these metrics that you need to watch out for, but really understanding which are vanity metrics and which are the metrics that count. And I'll talk a little bit about what everybody was in love. Every investor was in love with fintech and e-com. And they're talking about GMV, like it's, the end all and be all, and we're SaaS players, and they're like, well, shoot, our revenue isn't nearly close to that, but then what is the take rate? And nobody was talking about take rate. And I think that it's essential as a founder. I mean, if investors aren't asking it, you need to be knowing it. What is your metrics that actually matter?
And just 2 points of what you're saying. I think Dexter brought it up quite well. With a large company like Grab can actually disrupt itself, take a month off, make it like a little hockey stick where it will take one step back and then 3 steps forward. I think it's a good thing to say. Maybe you don't take a month off, maybe you take weekends to look at the founder and say, let's reassess our business model. How do we fix the unit economics? And I think this idea of, our investment house basically looks at all these startups and we're like, okay, number one questions with Warren Buffett will always ask with Charlie Munger, back to basic, how are you making money, and what efficiency compared to your whatever growth metrics you're putting in there. It doesn't matter if you're not profitable as soon as possible, right? So speaking of profitability in finance, I can ask 3 of you in terms of what are the financial pressures right now, and more importantly, the workarounds that you're seeing for startups securing that funding. I mean, obviously, friends and family is a very popular way of doing it in the Philippines, but what are you seeing as best practices from the startups you work with, as the startups you yourself have founded, to be able to build that resilience for better days when the headwinds are coming? Here?
Yes, sir. I mean, well, before I answer your question, I think it's nice that you're all talking about maybe the financial aspect of the business. When you look at, let's say, the ecosystem as a whole, there are three main areas whereby a lot of our startups are really struggling. Of course, aside from the unease of doing business, which we all supported, for example, just for HR policy and whatnot, and also let's say the lack of let's say access to let's say expertise. Fundraising and shortage of capital remains to be a very important aspect, or at least the most significant challenge for let's say a lot of startups, especially in the early stage. What our experience thus far is that aside from fundraising for friends and family, we've also started to also navigate or at least not navigate, but bring let's say venture debt into the play. So if you look at and that's a point that we made earlier, private equity might be slowing down, it has grown a bit, but there is more interest in private debt. And that's the same way I think if you look at even the venture capital space, there is more interest now in entering venture debt. Now that will be structured differently where, instead of let's say the debt being a function of let's say a collateral, it's going to be backed by let's say receivables that will be happening for your business. So these are things that we work with some of our startups where they were not able to raise capital mainly because it's hard to raise capital now, but there is still other facilities for you to take advantage of like that. So that's one example.
Exactly. As someone who's invested in private debt as well, the revenue expectations are also a little more keen, right? A little more tight in terms of the expectation. Plus a little more due diligence as well, because your profitability hinges on, for example, receivables and receipts, which sometimes don't get paid toward the end, right? Especially if you're working with large conglomerates, who tend to not take care of the SMEs very well. So, but what do you see about that? I mean, you even give some case studies in terms of who you were working with successfully. How they basically diversified their funding base and how did they tinker and tailor their business models to address those demands of investors and now lenders.
I will answer your question, but I also just wanted to use this question to give a little bit of highlight to some of the government programs that are on offer as well, right? Because for the earlier stage startups that are still building product potentially, or at super early revenue stages, there's actually quite a broad range of available government programs, whether it's equity-free grants, whether it's zero interest loans. So it turns out that the period of zero interest isn't totally over. There's a tiny pocket out there provided by the government departments, but that honestly is an incredibly valuable source of funding for the right startups at that stage, and obviously we tend to do it at the early stage of the spectrum. But to be honest, I wouldn't, just to try and answer your question as truthfully as possible, yes, we are seeing more lenders in the space, so Esquire Finance, Arc Capital, and other players like that. But obviously, it still has to be, it has to make sense. Yeah, it has to be the right kind of business model and the right kind of revenue model for the debt funding. And what I would sort of urge founders to think about is not so much about particularly varied sources of funding, but more approaching your fundraising from VCs in a slightly different way. So thinking about the runway or the growth cycle that you're looking to fund, but it could be either shorter or longer, right? Because it pertains to your specific strategy. So are you looking to raise a smaller little bridge round or extension round to generate a specific degree of traction, which is going to prove compelling to slightly later stage VCs? Or are you recognizing that it's difficult to raise funding right now? Go out and ask for funding for a longer time frame. Keep running relatively lean. As Alex said, pay very close attention to your unit economics, and last for a little bit longer that way in order to get to the next stage of funding cycle. Because we still operate in the circle, which includes these guys, which includes Foxconn and Hire and Gobi and OpenSpace and a plethora of other local VCs, and the angel ecosystem is also growing here. Not just the friends and family, but genuine third-party independent angels that are coming to our events, coming to our demo days, and looking for startup investments as well. So I do think that venture capital is still available. But my last point of this would just be you also have to be very smart with the way you spend, right? So you don't necessarily need 300 business cards printed or a ton of t-shirts or embroidered company bronze. Even things like a super functioning all bells and whistles website is not necessarily as important as focusing your hustle and your spend on customer acquisition and getting that traction. And if if you reflect that in your financial projections, investors will see that you're looking to spend money on the right things at the right time, and they'll be more likely to deploy from a venture perspective.
Absolutely. Bootstrapping and the pair-of mentality is helpful these days. Investors are looking for that as well. Profit this year was never in the beginning, but in the year of hard money, it's gonna be now looked at as a metric as well. That's what you see.
Well, I like what Ben said, right? Is changing your approach and how you pitch to VC. Because while it's great that there are all of these other sources and other types of places to get funding, I mean, for sure, the angel network in the Philippines is growing. Yeah, it is growing versus how it was a number of years back, right? And then you have the syndicates that are maybe not just based in the Philippines, but there are so many syndicates based in Singapore, elsewhere in the region that are actively looking at businesses in the Philippines. You have growth equity for later stages, you have venture debt, etc. But I think if you are operating your business in a way that is efficiently going for traction, then you will get funding. I mean, obviously, so long as all the basic, the fundamentals are there, because there is funding around. In fact, we have, we see it. I'm a venture partner in Integra, and we're really, really looking for founders to invest in. So I do think that, like in the Philippines, our biggest issue is that we need more fundable founders.
No, thanks. Go ahead.
I just like to add also, like, I think you need to be, a lot of founders need to also look at where the path to, let's say, raising money or just growing is not through just VC or debt and whatnot. There's also more creative ways of looking at it where, hey, are there any bigger players that are available for me to integrate myself with that they could maximize services? So there's a resurgence of, let's say, a lot of smaller size M&A in the region, and that's at least what we experience where you have either, let's say, smaller, let's say, HR companies that were acquired by Sprout, or let's say even interregional play where they want to start expanding their operations with the Philippines, then they also acquire let's say a similar business in the Philippines to be able to launch that. So a lot of those don't really get written out in public, and a lot of those are actually happening. So it might seem like, oh, there are no deals happening, but in reality, those are private deals. They're actually what's put forward that's happening in the Philippines as well.
Thanks for that. And being that space as well, we don't tend to advertise it. More than capital, some of you have heard of that and you have a company called Pax Capital. Private equity did. That is something you do by going to a conference like this, right? Having out, I don't know if it's published or wherever you go to, the idea that the network is out there, the founders are there sharing best practices. When I was in the UK, you see this, most of the business is dealt with either on a punt or a pub, right? So at the end of the day, that social network really helps startups right now. I'm not asking you to spend all your money on liquor, but at the end of the day, that's where most of the ecosystem is being built, where you're sharing pain points, best practices, and at the end of the day, making deals, right? And then outside the border, on shared office space. So I started thinking about that. Now, at this point, we've got 10 minutes before we wrap up. I'd like to open it up to many of you who do want to take advantage of the wisdom of this panel. Feel free to go direct, introduce yourself and your question, and you can address it to any or all the panel members. So we can start now. Thank you. There's microphones on both.